Good. Well, welcome to the Leadership Lounge. It's great to have you join us this month. I'd like to introduce our guest here. We've got an international guest this month in Dawn Jarvis, and Dawn is based in Queensland in Australia. She's the managing director of the Stellar Leadership Group and author of Leading Corporate Clans. She's the founder of FLAG, the Female Leadership and Growth, and the author of the Stellar Model. Dawn has years of experience leading teams and organisations in the UK civil service and the NHS, and she now trains and coaches leaders to lead well. And listeners to the Leadership Lounge may well ask, Colin, how on earth did you manage to scoop an international leadership guru like Dawn? Well, the simple story is that Dawn's publishers, Softwood Books, Maddie Glenn and Nathan James, introduced me to Dawn's book. Nathan said, I think you might find this interesting. And I did. And we then made connections over LinkedIn. So that's the power of social media and connection. And so I'm delighted that Dawn said she could join us today in the Leadership Lounge. So welcome, Dawn.
Thank you very much for having me. What a humbling introduction. It sounds great when somebody talks about you like that. So thank you very much. And yes, I've done and I am all of those things, but all said together sounds fabulous. Thank you.
Yeah, well, and it's great that you can just join us. Really appreciate when you said, actually, would you like me to join you in the Leadership Lounge? And we're really delighted. So Dawn, you're the managing director of Stellar Leadership Group. What does that entail?
Well, I run my own company, so I'm the head of the company, have 3 or 4 people that work with me in Australia. And I say 3 or 4 because it depends what work we're doing. We pull associates in when we need them for additional things. And I have 3 or 4 people who work with me in the UK. So it's a business that operates here and in the UK still. And it means that we get to choose the kind of clients we work with, lots of interesting assignments, and really fascinating organisational problems to provide people support and challenge in equal measure on. And I like that phrase. I use that a lot. And it's one of the unspoken straplines of the business is that our job is to provide challenge and support for people to be better.
Yeah. Brilliant. And that really aligns with the work that we do at Everyday Leader, which is why I think we found that good connection that the support and challenge has to sit together, doesn't it? I'm really intrigued, Dawn, both for me and actually for our listeners, just in terms of your leadership journey that kind of led to this role, in terms of where did you start from and kind of where have you been? We've obviously mentioned a couple of things that you've done in your introduction, but yeah, just a little bit about your leadership journey.
Well, I'm sort of an accidental leader, I guess. That's how I started. I ended up in a part-time casual job in the civil service after I came out of the RAF. So I was in the military for quite a brief period of time and ended up signing people on at the Dole office in one of the various recessions that the UK had. And I just then ended up never being afraid to speak up and never being afraid to speak the truth to power. And that led me to stick my nose in places where I probably shouldn't. And then what happens when you do that is people say, yeah, well, maybe you should try doing it then. And so I got various different levels and different types of leadership roles as a result of that, and ended up as a senior civil servant, a director level HR type person in about 8 different government departments. I've done some amazing and, frankly, soul-destroying roles. And I think when it came to about the 5th restructure and machinery of government change that I was going to have to lead, I decided it was time for a change and moved to the NHS, thinking, that will be pretty similar. Public sector organisation, large-scale bureaucracy, what can be different? And it was one of the biggest culture change shocks I've ever experienced. And we can talk more about that if we need to. And that was brilliant. I enjoyed that. Fabulous job. And the organisation was huge and complex and great learning, leading lots of complex teams. And then I ended up, again, accidentally as the financial turnaround director when we went into a big financial meltdown in 2015. And that just gave me another string to my bow, because it brought me the challenge of how systems and organisations work together and how people, individuals, teams, organisations and systems have to be in harmony to work. And I think I got really good baptism of fire and a grounding in systemic politics, I suppose I would call it, as well as then politics with a capital P from all my government working. So I'd always had a hankering to go onto my own business and do it, but there was a point in your life when you think, if I don't do it now, when will I do it? And it was when the financial turnaround and the improvement work ended. That was a good opportunity. So I suppose I've probably got almost 40 years experience of being in management or leadership posts, from leading teams of 10 or 12 in an employment benefit office to sign people on when they came in because they were on the dole, or through to whole organizations and whole teams, and the complexity that brings in systems.
Yeah. That's a really rich journey. And I think, as I've discovered, actually all those experiences help us blend our kind of understanding of people and leadership, doesn't it? And that richness that you've talked about enables you to do the work that you're doing today because you've got that insight. And I think one of the things that I found as we journey through, it helps shapes kind of our values that we kind of lead by. And so what have been the values that you've kind of have been key to you and that have been shaped through that experience?
I think there's probably three values that would be the cornerstones of how I am in the world, and therefore how I operate in business and in leadership roles. And the first one, and I've been challenged on this a number of times, is justice. It's a broad value. And I think when I was younger, that manifested itself in being the voice of people who couldn't speak up. Thought that was a good thing to do. Calling out inequality, calling out lack of justice, calling out lack of fairness, and really campaigning on that on the behalf of others in a rescuer mode. If anybody's familiar with Cartman's drama triangle, classic rescuer, I'll do it for you because you're probably incapable and I can probably do it better. Now that I'm older and wiser, that's turned into supporting other people to find the voice if they choose to speak out about their own injustice. But it's still, justice is still a big thing, and it comes from being brought up in a household of police officers and working class public servants and just a very fair-minded family. I think the second one would be integrity, and I feel that I always call values the sleeping policemen that are there. You don't know they're there until somebody rolls over them and you get a big jolt. And integrity, or somebody challenging my integrity, is probably the one that would drive me to, I was going to say fight or flight mode, but actually to fight mode. That's the one that gets me really angry, probably to the point of tears. If somebody says, "Oh, where's that? Are you doing that right? Is that a bit unethical?" I can probably rile up with that. And I think the third one would be truth. I'm not a big believer in being wholly truthful all the time, and my explanation is that sometimes that doesn't help the situation. Nobody wants their husband to say, "Yes, your bum does look big in this," when you ask the question. And that might be the truth. But actually being able to hold a mirror up to organizations and ask a question, is this how you want to be perceived as leaders by your organization, is a very powerful part of the work that I do now. And I used the phrase earlier, speaking the truth to power. And I've never been afraid to say, to notice it, we call it in the business, notice it and name it. I've never been afraid to say, looks like this is going on around here. What do we all want to do about it? And I think it's about how you do that. So truth is very important, both in the work I do and to me as a human.
Yeah, brilliant. Those values are so key. I was smiling and nodding with your particular one around integrity. That's one of my core ones, and can really relate to what you're saying. If integrity is questioned or integrity is being pushed in the situation. And I also love your thing there around really you're blending that justice and truth, but also with that sense of kindness and lifting people up, that there's a purpose to that truth, to aspire to better things. So those are brilliant, and I can see how those perhaps have been shaped by all your experiences that you've shared so far as well. So just before we move on to our our topic, and we're going to be exploring today really about team thinking and how we can lead team well. And maybe it's certainly a question on my mind, but maybe on our listeners. So you're in the UK, but you now live in Australia. So apart from the sunshine, maybe what sparked the move to Australia?
Oh, well, so I went into business for myself. I set the company up in 2014, part-time, whilst I was still working. And then I launched fully into my business in 2017. And there'd been a chief executive I'd worked for in the past that had migrated to Australia. And ever since he did that, maybe 5 or 6 years before that, he'd been saying to me, come and have a job, come and have a job. And I'd be like, oh, no. I'd never been to Australia. We live on the Gold Coast in Queensland. I'd never heard of the Gold Coast. I didn't have an idea where that was. And when I went out on my own, in business development terms, I contacted a load of people who I'd known and said, I am now available for work. And lo and behold, completely coincidentally, they put out a tender for some executive support. And it was just so fortuitous. And you think, where are the stars or whatever you think your gods are in this world that make these things happen? In that, when I looked at a copy of the tender, it was international tender, because here they tend to look to the NHS a lot. So they look to UK experience. I wanted somebody who's a qualified coach and a qualified mentor, somebody who'd done financial turnaround in public health, somebody who'd been on the board and a senior executive in public health, somebody who could work with teams and help with dysfunctional teams. And it could have almost been written for me. And so you just think, this is an opportunity. Why would you not apply for this tender? Because clearly somebody wants me to have it. And so I applied for the tender, did what was then in those days a Skype interview for the work. What happened to them? And I got the job. And it was for 3 months to come out and do an assessment piece, do a bit of work with the team. The leader of what was a surgical division of the public hospital had come into post on the back of the previous 7 people being eaten alive and spat out by the surgeons because of the toxicity in the team. And it was just a real opportunity too good to miss. My son was 14 and still in high school in the UK, and they came out for a month or so, and the school gave him some work, so they got to experience a month or so of living out in Australia. And we just thought, what a great place. And that was the end of it. Came back, and there was a clamour for the services that I provided. The culture out here and the management and leadership culture is a bit different and a little bit behind some of the themes that would have been in the UK at the time. And so I was able to bring a fresh perspective on the issues. And so for about 2 years, I came backwards and forth. I must have done about 20 flights in those 18 months or 2 years. And then when my son transitioned from 16 to 18, he would have done A-levels in the UK. We just said to him, how do you fancy doing 2 years of schooling in Australia? And he said, why not? It's a bit of our family motto, really, is why not? And what's the worst thing that can happen? And the answer to those both the questions were, yeah, indeed, why not? And the worst thing that can happen is we come back to the UK and you start school again. So we came, and the work that I do is quite niche, so that Queensland government here have sponsored me to open a branch of the business here, which is why we were allowed to stay here. We will, and have 2 trips this year back to the UK to work with clients in the UK. So COVID aside, it's definitely still an international approach to business.
Yeah, brilliant. I love that story. Just an opportunity came up, and it's then shaped what you do, which is fantastic. So we're going to explore today team thinking, and as any leader knows, successfully leading your team is a key to success. You've mentioned even in that story where you have a challenge with leading your team, and particularly working up and working sideways. And taking people with you is a key part of that. But that doesn't happen by accident. It must be purposeful and kind of responsive. And you've got lots of experience, Dawn, of developing strong and effective team and leading it. And it's now obviously one of your speciality areas that you support people with. And you've given us a little flavour of some of the expertise that you've got of leading teams. So from all of this experience, what are the key things that we need to get right when leading a team?
Oh, I mean, I could go on for hours about this. So let's make sure you could tell me where you need to, Colin. I think that fundamentally, there is a why, a what, and a how for a team. And, Simon Sinek's so famous for talking about, make sure you know what the why is. And he does that in lots of different contexts. But if it's a team, there's an organizational reason why that team has been put together to work together. Or what's the point of them being a team? So when you boil it really down to what why and what purpose is if we weren't a team anyway, would the work still get done? Then there's really no sense of having a team in the first place. So when I work with leadership teams, what I'm saying to them is, would all of the people that work with you still get their job done if you weren't a leadership team? And if the answer to that's yes, then what's the whole point if you're being a leadership team to lead them? There's got to be more than just being a collection of individuals. So the work then with leadership teams, and it's actually the same with any team, but the work with a leadership team is what added value are you having by being together as one team? And usually for senior teams, leadership teams, it's to unblock the blockers or to make the right decisions or to help people do the right thing. So there's a different purpose for a leadership team than there would be for a team who are delivering a set of outputs, because their purpose is to deliver the set of outputs well. But if they can't articulate that together, say the same words and mean the same thing by those words, then you're never going to get anything done. So that's the core. And in the Stellar model, leading purposefully is the core element, and everything spins off that. That's the why. The what part of it then would be, what do we practically have to get done as a team in order for everything else around us to function? And usually that's about, we need to come up with a really good plan to deliver the purpose that we've got. So that's a strategy, a vision, a mission statement, however you want to phrase it. And they all mean slightly different things to slightly different people. The semantics don't matter. But knowing where you're going and having stepped out plan to get there in whatever detail is right for your organization is absolutely critical. And making decisions well as a team, making sure everybody knows what they are, and all of that comes into the what we do, the plan, how we do it, and how we are accountable to each other for doing that. And then I suppose the third thing, the how, is all about the behaviours we employ in order to do that, and how we choose to describe those behaviours as values, as behaviours. That's probably a whole other podcast, Colin, about the difference between values and behaviours. But definitely why, being clear on that, having some clear practical what's and being clear what's acceptable ways of doing things, the how would be the fundamentals if I really had to boil it down.
Yeah, I love that simplicity. Actually, we have books and books and books on leadership, don't we? But it just does boil down to those three things. And I think for our listeners, that gives such clarity and almost some key questions to go back and ask themselves in terms of that. And particularly going back to your one at the beginning there, just around if we're not adding value, what's even the point of this team is so key. So you mentioned the Stellar model about leading kind of purposefully. And so just tell us a little bit more about this Stellar model and kind of where it came from and the core components that will kind of help people, particularly in terms of leading their team.
Well, it's interesting because only today was I going back and weeding out some old client folders, and the Stellar model started as the STAR model. We're going back about more than 12 years. And it was loosely based on Lencioni's 5 dysfunctions of a team.
Yeah.
I didn't really like the term dysfunction being in a leadership model. And Lencioni, the book's great, Lencioni's great, and the model's great. I'm not doing it a disservice. For me, as an appreciative inquiry, a hunt for the good stuff kind of person, I wanted something that sounded more positive. And the 5 elements in Lencioni's model didn't have enough in it for the world I operate in terms of public sector and the layers of complexity that they have. So I started to alter it slightly to use it with clients. And over the years, it's the names of the elements have changed and the models have changed, but I've always had a diagnostic that went alongside it. First of all, it was done on paper and pens, and people would tick whether they thought they were good at purposefully leading or kindly leading or whatever it was. And now we've got an online diagnostic through Score app, which is really simple to do. So you answer there's 8 elements. I'll tell you what they are in a moment. And you answer 2 questions on each element, and you get an immediate email back with the answers. So when I moved to Australia, I've always wanted to write a book. Everybody thinks there's a book in them, don't they? And everybody should try and give it a go. It's a fabulous experience. And I thought when I got it, and I had a book deal in the UK to write about this leadership model and all the stuff that goes with it. But when you work for yourself, you're too busy looking after clients to take the time out. And when I moved here, there was something about the land here and the indigenous population and their story and the way that they describe their connection to the land that made me really want to include some of that in how I looked at the Stella model. So again, fortuitously, I was walking along the foreshore of the ocean one day and came across this indigenous guy selling his paintings, which were beautiful. And I said to him, "Oh, do you fancy helping illustrate a book for me?" And he sort of looked at me and I realized, like he told me later, the look was the amount of people that say things like that to him and then it never comes off. He sort of went, "Yeah, go on then, fair enough." We met up and we got on like a house on fire, and me just spending an hour or two telling him about the model, he drew it freehand on a piece of paper in my notebook, and it was exactly how I pictured it. And so he ended up painting a huge, it's 1.5 meters by 1 meter painting, which I've got in my hall, of the Stella model. It's beautiful. And the indigenous culture has a thing called dream time, which is where they get their wisdom from the ancestors during dream time. And so he created a story of a dreamtime spirit called Stella that came to their ancestors and taught them about leadership. And he told some beautiful stories about what leadership was like in ancient clans and tribes and mobs, as they call them these days here in the indigenous culture. And the other part of the book is me writing about what it's like in corporate clans these days. And so the model then, and the way that he's described that connection, it was just the similarities across the ages were just a brilliant opportunity to miss. So the center model, as I said earlier, is purposefully. And then the 3 elements at the bottom are accountably, decisively, and strategically. And then the 4 at the top are clearly, and often that's one that's really missing in leadership and leading teams, being clear on people's roles, responsibilities, who's doing what when. And then the remaining 3 are curiously, kindly, and vulnerably. And so we must have now well over 12,000 completions of the Stella model questionnaire in its various iterations over the years. And what that tells us is when we find a team, and it's the answers to the questions are all working well, work in progress, or not there yet. And they've been the same answers to the whole period of time. When we get a team who is not there yet in purpose and strategy, we can't do any work at the other end of the elements until that's sorted. When we get a team who scores really well on kindly, they often don't hold each other to account well, because they're really nice to each other, but there's no grit in there. And so we use it as a diagnostic when we work with teams, and we then test again in 6 months or a year to see how they've progressed. And interestingly, with a client in the last couple of months, we've developed a stakeholder questionnaire. So this one team I'm working with, who shall remain nameless, scored themselves really, really well. And I was discussing it with the chief executive of the organization, and he went, "No, that's not them. I don't know what they're doing, but that's not them." So we developed a stakeholder version, which is to ask a range of people, how do you see this team? Same questions, but rather than we are, it's they are. And I'm loath to call it a 360 because I don't like 360s. I'm happy to explain why. They can be used quite unproductively in organizations. So But this is quite a snapshot from stakeholders of how they see your team performing, and very useful. So we ran it with this same group of people. It's completely opposite colours. This one was all green that they did, and this one was all red. And that's an interesting conversation with them about how they want to be seen by stakeholders in the future.
Yeah. Brilliant. We're going to explore just a few aspects, not obviously the whole of your stellar model, but a few of them just to really draw out for people around leading team. And one of the difference between just being a group or a team is this unifying purpose, which is why, purposefully sits right at the core of what you do. And you talk in your book around leading people strategically, making the vision and steps clear. So what are the things that we can do to get that right as leaders? Have you got any insight for our listeners on that?
So the shared purpose is, you're right, it definitely needs to be there. But it's a bit more than that, I would say. It's about active skill and will to deliver that shared purpose together. Mm-hmm. Because you can verbalize that you've got a shared purpose as a group, but it's about having mutual skin in the game. And I think the way that we make sure that happens is getting everybody together and getting people to talk about where this group of people who we want to become a team needs to end up in the future. So a bit of future-focused imaginings, dreaming about what the future state could be. And then, and only then, when they've been really imaginary about how the future could be so good, do we then pin it down to the realities of what could happen. So if I was running a session with like a strategic planning session with an organization, I'd want to look at the context they operated in. So if they were part of a big organization or they were a single startup, what's their context? So a little bit of, you could absolutely do a SWOT analysis or a PESTLE. All of the standard things are still really good value. What are the things that are impinging us from the outside, be they our bosses above us or be they the marketplace or whatever? And how do we want to respond to that? The want bit is, how good could it be if we're on our best day? And then given where we are, I don't know, resources, financial position, staffing position, market product position, based on reality, what can we do? And then I'm always encouraging people to have a realistic plan and a stretch plan. So the realistic plan might be, we want to bring a new product to market in the next 6 months, or we want to meet the KPI that the government have given us if we're in a government position. Whereas the stretch might be a little bit harder and a little bit better than that. And I think the final thing I would say on that is, the one thing I see with leaders and any team member that talks about this is people are really, really good at saying, what we need to do is this. So this is the thing we're going to do. And then full stop. Nothing else comes out. It's the same with decision-making in groups. Though we really need to make a decision on that. And I'm listening because I observe a lot of group work and teamwork. What? Go on then? What's the next thing you're going to say? And they say, well, so you need to make a decision, or you need to do this thing. What are you going to do? How are you going to do it? Who's going to do it? And when are they going to do it by? So I'm all for the big dreaming phase where you imagine how good it could be. Then you've got to actually really put some stakes in the ground to show that the thing you have dreamed about will be delivered.
So those visions and steps are really clear, but not just it's not just that this is what we need to make a decision, but it's about getting that real clarity in the steps that people are taking going through. I'm kind of really intrigued about how we really get people fully engaged. And your model talks about, a purpose for the team, but where each person fulfills a really purposeful role. So how do we really engage people? Because you said it's about getting those people together, isn't it? And the model you've just explained has a sense of collaboration, but how do we really engage people then in this purposeful role that you've mentioned in the book?
Well, there's a number of layers to that, I think, Colin. And the first one is about having them engaged in the discussion that you're going to have about the thing you want them engaged in, right?
Yeah.
So we've all been to workshops where it's clear that, a third of the people were told to go, don't really want to be there. A third of the people are so enthusiastic, they speak all the time, and a third of the people don't, can take it or leave it.
Hmm.
And what you will have seen in the book is the process that we use for running workshops, which, because I'm in Australia, we call the workshop surfboard, but is taken from Dick and Emily Axelrod's Making Meetings Work, which they describe the meeting canoe. And the getting people engaged in doing the work bit at the beginning of this process is fundamental. So there's a welcome part, which I won't go into, but that's important. But the connect part is vital. So this is if you're having a meeting about something and or running a workshop, what often I see other facilitators do, or people who do team coaching, is maybe doing some sort of icebreaking exercise. Tell me the last takeaway meal you ate, or find somebody that you don't know and do 2 truths and a lie or whatever. And I mean, look, they're okay. And, there's using a big, large group setting, I might do something a little bit light and a bit funny. But actually what the connect part of getting groups together and teams together to work well is twofold. It's to get them to connect with each other on a human level. It might sound a bit airy-fairy. It's really important. And I'll explain why with the later parts of it. And then getting them to connect with the work that you're going to do that day in the room. So because they need to feel as though they're there for a purpose. They are special. They've been chosen to attend this place for something great that they can add to it. And once people feel that, because you get them engaged straight away, they will take part. And it's just as easy to do this online. We run online things all the time. And that awkward bit at the beginning where everybody's sort of waiting for it to start, and when nobody really knows what's happening. And we are always doing something with people to engage them and connect them and link them up in that period of time. Because the sooner you get people putting emojis or typing up, engaging in the chat box, the better, because then you've caught them and they'll be with you. So we might run an exercise. If we were doing something on, I ran a whole series of events for a political party in Australia, who again shall remain nameless. And they were trying to get a candidate elected. And they wanted to bite chunks out of each other. They couldn't agree on anything. And honestly, it was one of the most interesting assignments I've had for a long while. So the purpose was, and I'm going to tread very carefully to try not to tell you about their political leanings, but the purpose was, why do you want this person elected? What is it about the mission of this political party that speaks to you? So that was the connection exercise. We just went around the room and I asked every one of them to give their personal purpose for really being part of this campaign. And as they were going round, and what they were doing there was learning more about each other as humans, really important.
Yeah.
Learning the life history that had brought them to the point that they needed to take a political stand on something and be part of a campaign. Fascinating data about the fellow humans that you've known for years but didn't know any of this about. And they were finding out why they were so connected to the thing they needed to work on. It's an absolute game changer. It's one of the best pieces of feedback I've had from any intervention with a team that I've ever run. They said, we were on the point of having to not work with each other again. And now we absolutely can see why we're all in this. And what that allows you to do is to forgive some of the behavioural vagaries that might crop up in people, because you know their why. So there's a real connection between personal purpose and team purpose.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love what you're talking there about that human connection. It's absolutely crucial. And you're right, when we get to understand each other's drivers and where we're coming from, as you say, what was it, the vagaries you described it as? Yeah, those bits that, that rubs me up a bit the wrong way about that person. As you say, you can forgive it because you really understand them and where they're coming from. And you perhaps realize, oh, actually, this vagary is because they're so passionate about the driver. So really connecting with one another. And I love the way you also got them to really connect with the work that they're doing as well. And that's a key part, to see how their purpose fits the overall purpose of what you're trying to work through. I think one of the biggest things that I face in supporting people in running their teams is are those people that still really struggle to connect with the work and connect their perhaps their purpose. They're not perhaps doing things well, and they need holding to account. You mentioned this early on around, you had a team that perhaps there's a certain color where it's all leaning around kindness, and that kindness is important, but you also talked about that grit to bring that clarity. So I've come across it that we get the extreme, someone that's a real bludgeon and they've got the grit and the clarity, but they haven't got the kindness. And then you have the other people that are just really kind, but don't have that clarity. So how do we get that clarity and kindness blended into the conversation so that we're lifting people up to aspire to things, or even having that really tough conversation around maybe this isn't for you, but in a way that's still supportive as the individual. So how do we get that balance of clarity and kindness?
Yeah, I think there's two sides to the points that you raised there. So first of all, it's what's the definition of kindness and what's your definition of kindness? So,
Yes.
I've got a bit of a girl crush on Brene Brown, if you haven't. And one of her mantras is clear is kind.
Yes.
So I absolutely believe that, always have done. It's fundamentally disrespectful not to tell somebody that they're not at the level they need to be in performance terms.
Yeah.
And if we fail to tell them that in a kind way, I've made hundreds of people redundant, dismissed loads of people in my time, and I've never had to fall out with them. They might not have liked me, but they've been at least grateful for the way that I did it.
Yes.
And so you can give difficult messages in a respectful and kind way to people. I'll give you some tips on how to do that in a minute. So what's your definition of kind, I would think? Kind is not being nice to each other. Kind is not challenging when things are wrong. So kind is a good word to run a team exercise on. What do we mean by kind? I think then really focusing on the why of the team helps you then get to the clarity of what does everybody in this team need to do in order to achieve our why. So I work a lot in public health care. Their why is really clear, and they often get confused in the either two people are doing the same thing and don't know about it, or something falls between two stools. So getting them to be crystal clear on the deliverable that they're responsible for and what they need other people to do to help them get there means that the challenge at a team level can be not taken personally. So once you get people to talk about the top 3 or 4 KPIs or deliverables or outcomes they're responsible for making happen, and talking in terms of accountability. So we could talk about why responsibility and accountability are different, but there's quite a lot of articles for listeners to read if they're interested. But that conversation, rather than letting things hang in the air, means that peers are able to say, so I haven't delivered the thing I was supposed to do because I'm waiting for that input from Colin. And Colin, you were going to have it to me last week. I know you've been really stretched with the current pace that you're working at. So can we renegotiate when you're going to give me your content for the thing I'm working on, then I can get the thing I'm working on done. And it's so multifaceted, isn't it? Because if you haven't had the conversations about relationships, if you haven't made the connection across the team, if you haven't worked out what winds one person up and not another person, how people are hardwired, that's quite a threatening situation to be leading as a team leader if you think both people are going to get offended by it. So the layers of making a team go through that process are quite important. And the final thing I would say is, we call them bold conversations, you call them vital conversations. We run short lunchtime training courses on them. And all I know from every experience I've had as a leader is pause on those and leave them, kick them into the long grass at your peril. So then what I say to, because I coach executives, and even the best chief executives who are brilliant at most everything find difficult conversations difficult.
Yes.
What I say to them is, try to tune into your physiology. And the moment your gut goes, oh, it's not quite right, don't push that away. Tune into it and think, what am I going to do about that? Because when it's the first time somebody's been 10 minutes late, you notice it. When the second time they're 15 minutes late, you notice it. If you leave that till that's happened 3 weeks in a row or 4 weeks in a row, it's a big issue. If you're able to take someone aside after, maybe you ignore time one because of a lateness, but something else quite big, you might tackle it the first time. But tackle it with some questions. How are you? What's going on for you? Is there anything I need to know? Because what I've noticed is this. It's not how you normally show up. So what do I need to know to help you go back to the way you've been, or to do this, or to do whatever it is kind of interaction one. And end that interaction with a, so what do you think we've talked about today? Tell me what you've heard me say, and tell me what we're going to do to turn this around. Because then you're asking for engagement with them in the process of the agreement to make a change. And that's one thing that people often miss from a difficult conversation, is to tell me what you think we've said, and a hook in to you've agreed to make a change and where this is going to be different. Because that makes the second conversation quite easy. Because if they don't change, the second conversation is, what did I need to do to make it clearer that you need to make a change here? Because you spoke back to me what we'd agreed. So something's going on. And only if you tell me that can I help you.
Yeah.
That same process makes the third conversation absolutely critical, because the third conversation is, we've talked about this 3 times now. You're now on a disciplinary charge, or you're now on a verbal warning, or whatever it happens to be.
Yeah. I love the blend that you've talked about, and it fits completely with your model where you said, actually, we need to have that conversation with each other to really get to know each other first. That's the foundation. Then that clarity that you've talked about, well, actually, we got really clear on what all our roles were. So those need to come first, but then it is around that mutual accountability, which stems from everybody knowing what they're doing, and then you bring in the kind of clarity, but you've also bring in the next part, which was around that curiosity, which is a key part for you, leading curiously, and what you've just described. The CEO or anyone who has a challenge with asking those more challenging questions, using curiosity as the key part of that, and it's a key part of the work that both of us do as coaches as well, in coaching people. So tell us a little bit more about leading curiously then, in terms of how that can be helpful to us as leaders and leading the team.
Well, leading curiously, the element of that used to be called dealing with conflict. It was where conflict sat, and it didn't really sit well. It was never one I liked, and it didn't sit well with a lot of clients who didn't like the word conflict. And so there's a few parts to it, but really, when one of my stock phrases is, it's pretty hard to be curious and defensive at the same time. So when we get into a situation that starts to frustrate us, or a behavior of another person starts to arc us up, if we can do a slight pause and say to ourselves, that's interesting. Isn't that interesting? I'm curious what it is about today that's making me react in that way. Where is that person pushing a button that I've got? And isn't that fascinating? Because if I keep letting that happen, we're going to end up in trouble. Or isn't it curious, fascinating, because people are just fascinating, that person's choosing to show up today in that way? I wonder what has gone on for them this morning, or I wonder what's going on for them in their lives that means they're showing up like that today. Because you have to have a basic preset viewpoint in your head, which is everybody's showing up in the moment, on the day, using the skills they've got in that moment. They're not choosing to be difficult, or they're not choosing to behave in a naughty way. They're not choosing to be rude. They are deploying the skills they've got for a whole range of purposes. You know, everybody's fighting a battle. We just don't know what theirs is, right? I think if you can sit in a space of, isn't that interesting? How fascinating. I'm really curious about that. It just gives you a bit of space to breathe before you then and respond, not react to that situation.
Yeah.
And I just think every leader, if there was one thing that people took from this conversation, it's the power of a great question. And you know that as a coach, and they are just brilliant tools. And if you can get yourself, 4 or 5 handy questions that sound like it's you with integrity to ask people, rather than judge people, accuse people. We never want people to start questions with why always, you always do this, you never do that. And that doesn't help relationships. Whereas questions that start with, I'm curious about, or I wonder, well, what is it? What more? What else? It opens things down. Whereas judgmental views and judgmental questions close things down, and you just get a better response from people.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the curiosity, I think, just it brings ownership back to them, because you're asking them questions, and just in those questions of curiosity, it allows them to reflect and take ownership, and therefore you're less likely to get the kind of anxiety reactions, because you're giving that sense of control back to them. So I love that approach, and I think that gives real clarity to our listeners. One of the other elements you've got is about living with vulnerably, and it's a key component. And in the work that I've been doing with people, creating safe space where people can be vulnerable, where perhaps as leaders we perhaps start the vulnerability loop, where we show vulnerability, and it means that people can be safe to do that too. And to me, that's really key for the culture that you want to create within the organization. So talk to us a little bit more then about how we could perhaps foster and grow this sense of vulnerability in our organizations, that then can become a seedbed for real honest reflection, so you can really get to the nitty gritty. How do we foster and grow that?
Yeah, I think it's a tricky balance, really. And, we've come out of the age of teaching leadership from a command and control perspective, where leaders have got to know everything, do everything, be everything. And that's a good thing, I think. We're teaching compassionate leadership now on leadership courses and MBAs. We're teaching vulnerability as a key pillar. And what that means for me and in the work I do with leaders, and as a leader myself, I was unafraid to say, oh, this is a big problem, isn't it? I've got the first idea what to do. What do you all think we should do? And then stop talking and just let them go. And, they usually have far better ideas than me. And it made life easier, because someone else would come up with the idea and I'd just help them along by saying, oh, yes, oh, yes, keep going with that. Or steering them if it was going off course a bit. And I think vulnerability is really intertwined with ego, and having a closed mindset or a growth mindset, and being open to feedback. So a couple of tips really would be, if you're in the habit of doing one-to-ones with the people in your team, and why wouldn't you be? That's a great thing to do. I would always be asking my team members, how are you? How's the work? How's your team? And how are we? How am I doing as your leader? And what feedback do you want to give me? And people freak out the first couple of times you ask that. Oh, I think it's lovely, everything's fine. But the more you do it, and the more you evidence that you listen and you take note of what they've said and you change, then you'll get that in bucket loads. And sometimes you get stuff you don't want to hear, but that's how we grow in that uncomfortable space.
Yeah.
And it's courageous then to be vulnerable. I think sometimes with some leaders, they have a difficulty with that relational vulnerability. So if you know the trust equation, I'm going to say it's from The Trusted Leader. It's Christopher Green, the book. The trust equation says that trust equals credibility plus reliability plus intimacy, completely divided by self-interest or self-orientation.
Yes.
So in order to get people to trust you as a leader, you need to be credible. So the things that you do, the work you do needs to be good. You know, there's no good being a nurse unit manager if you can't nurse. You know, but I mean that doesn't mean you've got to be able to do everything your team does. But they want you to be credible as a leader.
Yeah.
You need to be reliable. So you need to be able to say what you're going to do and do what you're going to say. People need to be able to trust that you'll deliver on your promises. And then there's a sense of intimacy. And I think this is where a lot of leaders struggle, because we have been, especially in the UK, what stiff upper lip, you don't have to tell everybody anything, you don't have to tell them when you're struggling. But what people want is they want to find a bit of a connection in you at a human level. That means that you can talk, you remember that they were going to the football and having a barbecue at the weekend, or that their kids were going through their GCSEs or whatever. And, you ask them about it because you've remembered. And they feel then that you care, and you're not some kind of person on a pedestal who has a paid masseuse and a chauffeur and a nanny just because you're a leader. You're actually a normal person that has to load the dishwasher or do the dishes by hand or whatever it is, just like they are. And then if there's any hint that you're in the job just to get it on your CV and for the next promotion, then they won't trust you either. So trust, easily lost, hard won. But intimacy and vulnerability is really part of it. So but however, I did say it was a fine balance. There's a great, obviously, there's quite a lot of psychometrics that look at emotional intelligence, but one of the ones I use also looks at emotional behavior. So there's some people wear their hearts on their sleeve. And that's okay if you've got high emotional intelligence, to know the impact that's having on others and rein it in and sort of control it. Whereas people with low emotional intelligence, which, by the way, is just a skill you can build. So don't worry if you've had a psychometric that says you've got low emotional intelligence, just need to do some work on it. But if you've got high emotional behavior and low emotional intelligence, that you're the kind of leader that comes in one day crying because it's also overwhelming and letting everybody see the depths of your sorrow, and the next day you're high as a kite or shouting at everybody because they need to work harder. What that means is the organizational energy is spent managing you rather than delivering the business. So you can be, I'm going to say, you can be too vulnerable. I don't really mean that. You can be overly emotional at work, and without the cover of good, solid emotional intelligence to moderate that can be a dangerous thing.
Yeah. And I guess what I'm picking up from that is that importance of self-reflection for yourself as a person, isn't it? And you talked about being able to grow that emotional intelligence, and that starts from just reflecting and being open enough to take the feedback you described earlier in that part, and just, actually, is there something I need to build and work on here? And when they see you modeling that vulnerability and reflection and improvement, then that creates a space where the team feel they can also do that. So I guess the summary of how do we foster that? Well, it starts from ourselves, doesn't it? Modeling that. And again, I love the key bit you talked about there, where you just get to know them. That, you said you're a fan of Lencioni's work. His truth about employee engagement starts with that we're known by the boss, and there is this sense that I'm valued by the person that's leading me. Dawn, it's been brilliant to spend time with you. It's one of these podcasts where when the recording's done, I'm going to be going back and re-listening and re-watching to glean even more. And our time has just flown as we've explored things. Just want to finish off with two last things, and that is, first of all, just to help people understand where they can find out more about the Stellar model, what the name of your book is and where they can find it. And also then just to end on our top 3 tips on leading team, because we always finish with our top 3 tips. So if listeners want to find out more about the Stellar model and want to get hold of the book, what's it called? Where can they find it? Tell our listeners a bit more about that.
Yes, it's called Leading Corporate Clans, and it's on Amazon.
So really easy to find, and any bookseller you can get hold of it, can't you? And they can just find it on Amazon if they want to. And so then let's finish off with the top 3 tips for leading a team. We always ask our guests in all the work you've done, and in some ways it's quite hard for people that all the stuff we've talked about and all you know about leading team. What's the top 3 tips for people?
I think number 1 is be yourself, and be yourself with skill. So with skill and integrity.
Mm.
And number 2 would be set expectations. Be clear and set expectations. And number 3 would be tell people how they're doing against those expectations. Praise heavily, highly, and often. And immediately when something looks wrong, it probably is. So tackle it.
Oh, brilliant. Again, such rich and simple clarity. I mean, we talked throughout, haven't we, about the importance of being clear. And I think, get your pens out, write that down, everyone, those 3 key steps. Dawn, it's been a privilege and an honor just to spend a bit of time with you. I often, when working with guests, come away learning, and I've learned so much just from just chatting and listening to you. Some things that we know, and it's brought that home again, and some new bits to explore. So, Dawn, thank you ever so much for joining us on the Leadership Lounge. It's been great to have you with us.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Great. And thank you, listeners, for joining us on the Leadership Lounge. We hope you'll join us again next month as we explore more leadership topics.